Let me turn the time over now to Wes Porter. He works with DHRM. He is, well, Wes, go ahead and introduce yourself.
No, thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. Yeah, so my name is Wes Porter. I am the EDIA Accelerator for the state of Utah. And really what that is my job is to look internally at different equity opportunities that we have here at the state. And I'm housed in DHRM. Obviously, I work on John Barrett's team. A little bit about me is that I've got a pretty heavy military background. Spent about 16 years in the military, still in with the National Guard, where I ran operations, victim advocacy. I ran the sexual harassment and response prevention program there with the military. I got about 10 years of higher education experience as both faculty and administration. Spent a lot of years on the HR side, looking at internal and external recruiting, equity and performance management, and I'm actually a rural Utah hire. And so what that means is that I live out here in Vernal, Utah, out here in the Uinta Basin, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to work for the state in this capacity. And that's a little about me. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get after it. So a couple of different things. I want to just kind of share a story and just kind of frame a picture for you. I want you to imagine setting sail from Hawaii in a canoe. Now your target's a small island several thousand miles away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now the Pacific Ocean is about 100 million square miles, all right? And that's bigger than all the land masses of the Earth combined. And for thousands of years, Polynesian navigators or wayfinders managed to do this without the help of modern navigation tools. There was no sextant, there was no compass, and there was no map. And ancient Polynesian wayfinders used the sun, the moon, the stars, ocean currents, planets, and even clouds to their fullest potential by learning that the water wasn't just to get wet, the sun wasn't just for warmth, and clouds weren't even just for shade. See, what happens is that during the voyage period, successful voyages depended on several factors, but nothing bigger than the wayfinders' ability to be familiar with their surroundings. Now, using ocean swells generated by trade winds, these navigators, these wayfinders, were able to tell which way was northeast or southeast. And in fact, even by day, they learned that the beating of the swell on the canoe, or the vakalua, the beating of the swell on the canoe told them which way was southeast, which way was northeast. The sun was just as important. Not only did it tell them the direction of the sun, tell them east or west, but during nighttime and right before morning hours, they could see the swells on the ocean, and that could tell them where they were. Now at night, wayfinders use what's called a star map. Now this isn't a physical map. What this is a mental map of the rising and setting points of stars and constellations at different parts of the year. In fact, the star called Hokupa'a, or the North Star, provided a fixed point, and in the south of the equator, they used something called Nebe, or the Southern Cross, to estimate where south is. Now, how they did this is where they held their hand out and they put the intersection of the Southern Cross and they went 1, 2, 3, 4.5, and they dropped down to the horizon, and that drop gave them south. See, even clouds under the right conditions can mask and indicate mountains, and even on still nights, the reflection of a safe atoll or a safe harbor can be seen off of those clouds. Now, when the wayfinders got a little bit closer to the islands, they would pay attention to the types of fish that were close, they'd pay attention to birds, and they'd pay attention to debris that floated in the water. You see, wayfinders needed to be abundantly familiar with their surroundings and include their surroundings in their decision-making to make it to their destination. Now, most importantly, because of the inclusion of a holistic approach to understanding the environment, wayfinders were able to have the ocean become a connection between the islands and not a barrier. So next slide. So today, here's what we're going to talk about. Okay, we're going to talk about 3 things on here. And we're going to talk about what inclusive leadership is. We're going to talk about how inclusive leadership is used. And we're going to talk about where do we start. And before we get there, I want to share one thing with you. And we'll go to the next slide. And this slide should be a picture of a young man that's kind of away from the group. And so, Rick, I think if you go forward just a couple slides, and just a big shout out to Rick today. He's my driver with some of the connection problems that we've had. So thanks, Rick. So I want you to look at this picture. Now I'm 200 miles away from everybody, and I could still hear people say, "Oh," and guess what? That's exactly the intent that I'm trying to get at this point, that feeling. Now, I got this idea from the Chief Diversity Officer of eBay. So what I want you to do, I want you to think of a time that you have felt excluded. Now, this could be from your youth. This could be a time in your career. This could be a time with your friends. This could be a time with your family. But I want you to really think about it. Try to feel the memory. What was going on through your head? What emotions can you name? All right, what were people wearing? Feel it. Now, I understand that for some people, this memory may be visceral and it may be hard, but it's designed to produce one thing that we're going to need for the rest of the day, and that is empathy. You see, empathy is the fuel for inclusive leaders. Now, in the workplace and beyond, empathy is the foundation of our ability to connect with each other as human beings on not just a emotional level, but it sets the stage for inclusion and collaboration in the workplace. So rather than a private sentiment, empathy should be an actual act. Now, the capacity to be empathetic it should catapult you to do something meaningful, but it's also going to take practice. Now, today, that act of empathy should be that you're continuing to look inward at your past. You're continuing to look at the reactions you've had with your team, with your family, with all the individuals that you work with. Now, just as empathy is taught when we're young, inclusive leaders can encourage their colleagues to be empathetic by practicing empathy as an act of inclusion. So like I said, are you feeling it? Do you feel that time that you felt excluded? All right, do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your gut? If it's there, that means that we're topped off. That means we have all the fuel that we need. So let's go for a little bit of a ride. Next slide, please. All right, so inclusive leaders. Inclusive leaders are individuals who are aware of their own biases and actively seek out and consider different perspectives to inform their decision-making and collaborate more effectively with others. So here's the question that you need to ask yourself. What makes people feel included in my organization? What makes people feel that they are treated fairly and respectfully, that they're valued, that they belong? Of course, there's many things to this, including the organization's mission, policies and practices, as well as coworker behaviors. But really what it comes down to this, and the research shows that we find that what leaders say and what leaders do makes up to a 70% difference as to whether an individual reports to feeling included. Now, this really matters because the more people that feel included in the organization, the more they speak up, the more they go the extra mile, the more they collaborate, all of which ultimately lifts the organization's performance. Next slide, please. So, an inclusive leader focuses on three things for their team members: to make sure that they're treated equitably, to feel a sense of belonging and value, and have the resource and support they need to achieve their full potential. But how do we actually get there? And what does all this mean? Because we've seen this before in our leadership style classes that we've had over the years. In fact, leadership is the #1 most studied subject throughout all of history, is how do we get people to do the things that we need to for an organization. So let's go ahead and dive in and start. The first thing, next slide please, is understanding the difference between diversity and inclusion. Now, this is important. Most leaders have a base understanding of diversity. They know a little bit of what inclusion is, but they're confused on the different nuances between the two and how they actually relate. And if an inclusive leader can understand how these two relate and how they align, they're going to have power. Now, Ritu Bhasin, the DEI consultant CEO, she expanded on what's called the 2 Qs, the quantitative and the qualitative. Now, diversity is the quantitative. Now, this is a representation of the people in the workforce: your gender, your race, your indigenous communities, LGBTQ+, all those different boxes that you check out in demographics that we always see in the organization, especially when we do new hires. See, what happens is we put all these resources towards a more diverse workforce. We've got a council, we've got training, we've got policy, we've got development, you've got an EDI accelerator. We put all these different things there. But the challenge is that most organizations become stuck in this land of diversity. Now, what's happening is that we say, come on, come all, bring all your different voices, bring all your different perspectives, bring who you are that's different, and show up to the workplace. We want you. Challenge is that when they do show up to the workplace, our leaders are ill prepared to manage and lead those differences because we don't understand the difference between the two. And leaders begin to promote something called the minimalization of differences in favor of sameness. Now, if a leader pushes a message of behavioral sameness or conformity, and people feel tokenism, and they don't feel valued. Diversity is important because inclusivity needs it, but being entrenched in only diversity means that we're being entrenched in only sameness. Now, this brings us to the next Q, the Q2, inclusion, or the qualitative. When you ask people how they feel when they come to work, how do they answer? I want to think about that. Ask yourself, how do I feel when I come to work? Can I bring my authentic self, my cultural self to work? Can I do me? Can I speak the way I want to speak? Can I say the things that I want to say? Can I talk about the things that I want to talk about in my personal life with good judgment? Now, I need to preface this because I always get this in a presentation like this. Wes, surely you don't mean they can talk about everything. Well, of course, I don't mean they can talk about everything, and don't call me Shirley. What I'm saying is that our organization has a rules and regulations, yes, but how does an inclusive leader get everything out of an individual inside those boundaries that are set? So you can have diversity without inclusion, and you can have inclusion without equity, men and women working together, gender pay gap. But inclusive leaders have the ability to develop culture, the inclusivity, the belonging. And diversity is about counting heads, where inclusion is making heads count. And the first step towards inclusive leadership is understanding the difference between the two and what your organization needs. Next slide, please. All right. Now, if an asteroid comes in right now, if the internet goes out, if Westport disappears, whatever, if you walk away from this presentation with just this one-liner, this is a win. And that is, if you have a brain, you have bias. Full stop. That's it. See, what a bias is, it's a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, a person, a group, with another. And it's usually seen as unfair. But here's the great thing. You see, it's not our fault. Biases are completely natural and they happen to everybody. And here's what happens. So your brain can actually process 11 million bits of data per second. However, you can only consciously process 40 bits per second. So you do the math. And what that means is that most of what's happening in our heads is happening outside of our own awareness. Now, to the brain, similarity equals safety. And so how the brain manages all these 11 billion bits of data is that it starts pulling all these files from our experiences that we've had in our lifetime. All the experiences that, hey, if you do this, you're safe. Hey, this equals safety. Hey, this right here will make you feel better. And the brain pulls all of those forward. Think about it. How many of us met someone who reminded us of someone we didn't like in the past? Could be a haircut, it could be a shirt they wore, could be a name. How does that impact your interaction with that new person? So I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting with some colleagues just last week, and we were talking about the same concept. And one of my colleagues mentioned that a new employee had the name of someone that she had a bad interaction with throughout her life. And then whenever that name popped up on the cell phone for a phone call, those feelings started to come back, and those memories and all those things that say, hey, don't do this so you can be safe, started to take over. And obviously, because of her inclusivity, she was able to get past that, but that's the first natural visceral reaction. See, what you're doing is you're thinking, I've met you before, and it didn't go well last time. In fact, you have some trust to rebuild with me. And this person has never seen you before, and they're in front of you for an interview. See, an inclusive leader knows that unconscious bias is consistently happening to them and the people around them, and they are actively seeking to combat this bias with awareness. I'll give you another example. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest forms of unconscious bias that inclusive leaders need to look out for is also the most common, and that's called the similarity bias, right? Similar to me bias. And I'll give you an example. So I was a training officer for an Army ROTC program at Southern Utah University, go T-Birds, and my primary function was to execute and develop training for cadets who were working towards earning a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Now, one of my favorite parts of the job was actually meeting new cadets on the first day. I just absolutely loved it. It's fall, they would come in, we would talk. And one of the other cadre members or faculty came up to me and said, hey, Wes, here's an individual I think you'll get along with. I said, yeah, I'd love to meet him. So right off the gate, I said, hi, my name's Wes, where are you from? And he says, oh, I'm from California. I was like, well, I'm originally from California. What part? He said, Chula Vista. I said, my family's from Chula Vista. My dad still lives there. We're on J Street. And he said, oh, my family's on L Street. Like, wow. And you could almost see us move closer together. Now, he had a very long last name that's full of vowels, named two tongue with a vowel. And I said, hey, where'd you get your last name from? And he said, oh, my family's from Samoa. I said, my family, my dad's from Samoa. Which one, American Samoa or Samoa? He goes, just Samoa. Another step closer. Now we're a couple polys together. Now I asked him, which island in Samoa is your family from? He says, Upolu. I said, you gotta be kidding me. My family's from Upolu, the village of Ko'omua. We went and we talked, and we ended up having lunch, and I spent most of the day with him just learning about him. And we found out that, yeah, we're even related in some aspects. At the end of the day, I went back to the cadre when we were cleaning up, and I stuck my head in the office, and I said to the major, the officer in charge, I said, you know, this cadet that I spent time with today, this person, he's going to be a good fit. How many times have we heard that in one form or another? This person's a good fit. Oh, I like this person. They're going to be good with it. This is a good fit. But when was the last time that fit meant they are so different from us? They think so differently than we think. Their perspectives are so different than our perspectives that they're going to be a great fit. Probably not that often. See, inclusive leaders have to be aware that our brain and our socialization, our process, has taught us to move towards similarities and to find common ground. And when we do that, when left unmanaged, our brains take all the strengths that we have from our safety and sometimes all the weaknesses that we've had depending on the person and assign them to that person. And this is all happening while we think we are being bias-free. See, what happens is this good fit construct in leadership specifically takes away safety, psychological safety. You see, the other cadets in the program, they were at a disadvantage right away because they saw that similarity is what got the training officer to spend more time and give them more attention. That endangered their psychological safety. And the danger of a leader not being aware of biases is that it creates a high fear, low trust environment. Next slide, please. Okay, we've all been here before, right? The meeting after the meeting. Now, just to read it here, it says there's a picture of a meeting. There's people inside the room and two people leaving the room. And the two people leaving the room say, now let's tear everything we just tactically supported, tear apart 5 minutes ago. So what that means is they left the meeting. In the meeting, they said, hey, yeah, everything sounds good. And they leave the meeting and they're saying, that's never going to work. How many times have we done that? I would assume some people have probably done that today. And we're actually very good at it. We got it down to an art form in some aspect, one or another. I'll give you an example. You're sitting there meeting and you're giving the head tilt. I do that a lot, the head tilt. Or you just kind of nod your head a little bit. So, yeah, okay, yep. Or even say, yeah, okay. And you drop little words. If you're really good, you grab your pen and you start writing things down. Now, they think that you're writing notes, but it's just, I practice my cursive. I think that's dying art. Or I'll write down things to do later, and I'm not really paying attention. See, what's happened is I'm waiting to really talk about what's going on in the meeting when I feel a little bit safer and after the meeting. See, we must create a place where we don't have to rely on the meeting after the meeting, right? Now, part of the role of an inclusive leader is to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe. We have to use empathy and inclusion to create environments where diversity of thought is the currency for innovation. Environments where differences are a low risk proposition. So here's my question for you. I just want you to think about this. What is the currency for innovation in your organization? What is it? Think about the last meeting you had. Think about the last project that you're a part of. Thinking about the last policy that you had to write or program or whatever it might be. Think about it. What was the currency for innovation? What did it cost to move it forward? What does it cost to get everyone on the same page? So I'll tell you this. If agreement is the currency for inclusion, innovation is in trouble. And diversity of thought is in trouble. Here's what happens. Next slide, please. Now, research conducted by Jones Consulting shows us that when we have diverse groups competing against groups that are more homogeneous, in the short term, these groups that are more similar, their performance exceeds the group that is more diverse. So the reasons for that is that trust takes time. You know, they use same words, mean different meanings, right? Mean different things. So once past the storming phase of the development, you can see an increase in performance for diverse groups. See, research shows that in a diverse group, individuals prepare their arguments to be more vigorous because they expect to be challenged. You see, the currency for innovation there is proper challenging, right? Challenging ideas and learning and digging. It's a harder process than agreement. Now, I had a boss once, and I used that term deliberately, a boss. And what he would do is he would ask for input on pending decisions during an admin meeting, but the decision was already made. This was more of a check the box type of thing. To make it worse, any constructive criticism on the merits of the decision and the options of the decision, they were seen as disloyal. They were seen as you're not part of the team. You need to get on the right bus, right? We've all heard that before. Never mind the actual impact of the decision in the short or long term. This created a low trust, high fear environment that caused me and other team members to see that the risk of difference was just too high, and the currency of innovation changed to agreement. You start hearing things like, what's the point of my opinion? You don't really want to know. What does it matter? My attendance is mandatory, but my opinion doesn't matter. We've heard that. What does that do with inclusion? Kills it. We, as inclusive leaders, need to make the framework and structure that lowers the risk of differences. Now, here's where we start with that. Next slide, please. So people exist in three circles. Excuse me. Now, it says that all human reaction and inclusive leader needs to manage these three circles. But in order to do that, we need to understand them. The three circles are individual, cultural, and institutional. Individual is the inner type. That's introvert. That's whether you're extrovert. That's the reason why this is your favorite color, the reason why this is your favorite food, the reason why this is your favorite football team, the things that inherently make you, you, right? The second circle is the cultural circle. And these are your maps of meaning, and this is how humans see and make sense of the world. It's a lot to do with your identity as well. For example, you know, a veteran, Samoan, a father. It's how I make things make sense when I see them. And then the third circle, and this is the one where we really get stuck on. This third circle is institutional rules, regulations, compliance. It's where we work. And what happens is that most leaders who don't understand inclusivity or inclusive leadership is they manage only at the institutional level. Now, back a few slides ago, we talked about sameness, right? A lot of times when you just lead at the institutional level, a lot of people believe that the barrier between institutional and cultural should be there. And that sameness is the most important aspect for innovation and results. We see this when we fall back on just rules and regulations. We see this when we fall back on just compliance, right? We show up to workplace, here's your uniform, here's what you wear, here's what you do, here's how you do it, now go. When I was working as a hiring manager, specifically recruitment, I was working with a manager that was looking to recruit somebody that comes in, and I'm explaining to him a little bit about inclusivity and what we're looking for, and diversity. And what he said to me was, Wes, I don't care what color they are, as long as they aren't a headache. That told me more about his leadership style, his leadership perception than anything ever could have. Because what that means is that the headache is they just do what they're told and they stay within this box. As long as they're checking the box, and that's all that I care about. I don't want a headache. What is the innovation? What is the currency for innovation in that aspect? So what do we do? Next slide. Inclusive leaders lead and manage people in a way that brings out the most of people. They take down that barrier and realize that what makes people people is how they make sense of the world, their culture, their maps of meaning, their groups, their identities. See, one thing that all of us will hear in the very near future is that we're using a holistic approach to our EDI initiatives, right? The same is true for inclusive leaders. Inclusive leaders approach the individual holistically, allowing and understanding that people are different, that they respond different. That helps create equity. Now, why is this important for leaders to manage this way? Well, in one of the latest studies, Utah identified as over 22% non-white. What that means is that Utah is becoming more diverse. In fact, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, I did hear this, that Utah is not very diverse at all. Well, we really are. And research says that we're continuing to grow our diverse populations. and we're inviting them into our workplace, as we should. But here's what happens. Next slide, please, Rick. What happens is, in order to leverage the value of diversity and the value of diversity of thought and background talent, inclusive leaders have to manage and manage well. Now, if you see this graph, what happens is that diverse groups who are not managed well don't even get out of the storming phase of team building and drop, and their performance drops, and it significantly tanks. A lot of people think from the first graph that diversity means you're going to have automatic high performance. No, this hinges and is predicated on something so important, and that's the leadership and the management of that team. Leverage for good and proper management of diverse groups comes from listening as a skill and understanding something very important, and that is intent versus impact. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is probably one of the most important things that we talk about today. Intent. All right, intent is what you have in mind as a goal when you decide to perform an action. Your intention, it reflects the type of impact you want to create with your actions. Impact is the result of those actions, but the results aren't necessarily the same as what you intended. So impact is the reality of your reactions, right? Now, intent and impact can dictate not only working relationships, but the entire workplace dynamic as well. And when the two align, people feel heard, people feel understood, they feel included. And what this does, this boosts productivity and boosts morale. And when intent and impact differ, people can feel hurt and they can feel angry, which often results in conflict. It results in miscommunication. And I want you to consider a couple examples. You tell your colleague a joke that upsets them. Your intent was to be lighthearted and funny, but the impact was hurtful. Your supervisor institutes a new policy whose aim is to improve our team culture. And what happens is the team sees it more as a surveillance program. The intent was to boost morale and collaboration, but the impact was demotivating. The thing to be careful of is that in the past, we've really focused on just the intent, right? We've said things like this before. What was, given the benefit of the doubt. Oh, they really didn't mean it. The problem is that when leaders have focused so much on intent, they actually minimalize the impact of people's action. When I say given the benefit of the doubt, reasons are important, yes, but we cannot minimize the impact that did happen right there. I'll give you another example. Good Samaritan laws. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of Good Samaritan laws or not, but every state has a type of Good Samaritan law. And what that is, it helps protect people who go out and help people in a medical situation. In other words, if you go help someone in a medical situation or emergency and you may hurt them a little bit or a lot of bits, guess what? You're still protected. The Good Samaritan law is there to protect intent. So let's run through this scenario. I'm out for a jog in the morning. An individual named Will, I don't know too many Wills, so I'll just say Will, is in the car and they are going super fast down the hill and they run into a barrier. Now I'm on a jog, so I ran over as fast as I can. I grab, Will's not responding. I grab Will, I pull him out of the vehicle, cut up his leg a little bit, and I start doing chest compressions. Now he was just in a very big accident, but he wasn't breathing. So if you ever done chest compressions before, it was actually pretty traumatic. You break the sternum wall and you're going about 2 inches deep and you're trying to get some oxygen moving through the body. Well, ambulance shows up and unfortunately, Will passes. Will dies. Well, the Good Samaritan law says I'm protected. So even though that I may have caused more damage to Will by doing those chest compressions, I am protected because my intent was good. Now they do an investigation. They come over to my house and they see this room, and in this room they have a wall. And in the wall they have a picture of Will, and I've been throwing darts on it. And I've got Will's schedule. And I realized that if I see Will drives here every single day on my jog, and I cut his brakes at just the right time in the morning, he's going to come down this hill and he's going to get in an accident and he's going to be hurt. Now, the intent changed, right? The intent goes from a Good Samaritan law to trying to help to, the first degree murder on that. The intent's important, but tell me this, what's the matter to Will? What's the impact on Will? It's the same. Doesn't necessarily care too much about what the intent is right away. The impact is still there. Now, don't get me wrong, reasons are important, but so are impact, and so are the results on someone's feelings and someone's individuality. You see, inclusive leaders provide opportunities for feedback and open communication to align that intent with impact. And they bring them together and they acknowledge the impact. They acknowledge the intent. Too often we only acknowledge the intent and we don't move forward. Next slide, please. All right. So, excuse me, where do we start on this? So I put together kind of what I call the P3. And what this is the three things that you can actually do to start inclusive leadership. And what they are is pause, practice, and provide. Okay, so the first one, pause to listen. The second one, practice curiosity. And the third one, provide space. So next slide, pause. So inclusive leaders pause and they actually search for opportunities to create an environment where instances of exclusion can be identified and brought to the surface to be addressed. The inclusive leaders understand the idea of invisibility of unconscious bias. Let me give you an example. Dr. Jones uses this example really well. How many people out there are right-handed? I'm guessing probably most of us. How many people are left-handed? There you go. Kevin Roop's right-handed. Nice. A lot of people are left-handed, right? All right, so here's the question to my left-handed people. Do we live in a right-handed world or do we live in a left-handed world? Go ahead and send it in the chat, or Rick can push it, or you can send me a hand. It sounds like you got a lot of people right-handed world. Give me an example of why we live in a right-handed world. Someone give me a couple examples. What do you got? Okay, so I got one. Doorknobs. Yes, that's a good one. Golf. That's a big one. What else? Guitars. Pledge of Allegiance. Notebooks. School desks. Scissors. Wow, yeah, everyone's get it, right? So yeah, I would agree. We live in a right-handed world. Coffee mugs. That one popped up. That's good. Let me give you an example. So here's my tea mug in the morning. I'm right-handed. I see a picture. Very nice. I'm left-handed. I see no picture on this. That kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about living in a right-handed world. Now, that being said, to my right-handed people, and I'm right-handed, do we wake up in the morning and do we just say, power to my people, power to the right-handed people, we rule, and we get as much undeserved swagger as we can muster and we strut out the front door? And then when someone who is left-handed says, hey, I mean, can we find some scissors that aren't right-handed? I don't feel like I'm included. I don't have anything that can help me out here. And do we say this as right-handed people? Man, shut up. You know, there's no problem. Stop telling me. I'm feeling discriminated against. You can do everything that I can do. You can drive. You can have your coffee. You can use scissors. There's not a problem unless you start one. You see, what's happening is that because the majority is having a right-handed experience, the invisibility of unconscious bias has happened. When you're part of a group that's in the majority, your group's way of doing things, your group's way of your norms, how you think, they are built into the institution and to the culture, and they're actually made invisible. And what happens is they're just called normal. Now, when I'm part of the group that's in the majority, I feel included, so I don't have to think about inclusion. I feel pretty good about it. Yeah, I'm friends with everybody. I got my group. I'm fine. Inclusive leaders do not have that ability just to sit down and think like that. Inclusive leaders pause. They pause to learn. They pause to listen. They pause to search. And they acknowledge and find opportunities of exclusion, even in the mundane. You ever try to get a unisex uniform together? What about PT standards for men and women in the military? Even though it seems mundane, what we've learned and what we found is that the biases have become invisible in some of our decision making at different levels. So inclusive leaders pause. So what I want you to do next week, I want you to pause and just think, is there a policy? Is there a procedure? Is there a ways that we're doing our meetings? What is it in our norms? What is it in our culture that may have people feeling excluded? All right, next slide. The next slide is practice. Practice curiosity. See, highly inclusive leaders have an open mindset. a desire to understand how others view and experience the world, and they have a tolerance for ambiguity. Now, this is very important. They have a tolerance for ambiguity. What that means is that when you get these different perspectives coming towards you when they're solicited, that's going to muddy the waters a little bit. That is okay. What that does, that causes you to challenge, it causes you to practice, it causes you to move forward, it causes you to think differently to come up with the right decision. In the face of difference, inclusive leaders practice curiosity. You see, inclusive leaders accept their limitations, but more importantly, they hunger for the views of others to complete the picture. Now, this thirst for continual learning helps drive attributes associated with curiosity. This includes open-mindedness, this includes inquiry, this includes empathy. Now, these behaviors, they don't come easy, right? I mean, there's nothing worse than sitting, and I've ran meetings like this before where, all right, I've opened up, what do you think? And you have all these things coming at you, and then you run into the if-win scenarios, and you feel like everything just kind of come to a screeching halt. Over time, you learn how to take those perspectives, and you start painting that picture together. And you realize as an inclusive leader, you don't have to do it by yourself. You show empathy, you show open-mindedness, and you ask questions. Now, time and effort are required to engage with diverse others. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's not easy. And it's a skill. What you're doing is you're synthesizing a broader range of perspectives that's new to you, and you're bringing them back in so you can make a decision. But once you master that, once you've asked all the questions you can ask, you ask where people are coming from, the result is loyalty. The result are people feeling valued. The result is more access. And for you, the result is more access to a richer set of information that enable better decision making. All right, next slide. Now, this is probably one of the most important aspects we're going to talk about today, and this goes back to psychological safety. Now, we talked a little about the meeting before the meeting. How do you actually help that? How do you actually help that there's no meeting afterwards? What do you do as an inclusive leader? How does that actually work? Well, you do this by providing space for perspective. All right. And what you do is when you provide space for perspective, you're creating a structure, you're creating a framework, and you're creating a way for a low fear, high trust environment. Now, this is one of my favorite techniques to do. It takes a little bit of practice, and it may not be easy for some, but I've seen some real results doing this technique. It's called the 2 and 2 technique. So before, I want you to kind of imagine you're in a meeting. You've got your leader saying different things. You've got people agreeing with the leader, but you just it doesn't sit right with you. You don't agree with it, but you don't necessarily feel safe to actually say something, right? This is what's happening right now in a lot of different meetings. Here's what the leader can do. It's called the 2 and 2 technique. And what that means is that before you're about to make a decision on a program, an approach, and a policy or project, you pause collectively and you ask yourself these 2 questions. 1, to the group. What are 2 reasons why people might agree with this decision? And then you ask the inverse. What are 2 reasons people might disagree with the decision? Asking those 2 questions is something amazing. You provided space, right? You provided a space where an individual can go, well, I've been thinking this way, so I'm not going to raise my hand because this person asked, right? And they asked for 2 reasons. I can give them one right now. That brought down the psychological safety barrier for people to actually bring their opinion forward. That's one of the best ways that I've seen in meetings to provide space. Other ways you look at it is on one-on-ones, you ask them not only just for the feedback, but you ask the general reasons like, why do you think this wouldn't work? Why do you think this would work? And as long as you ask them back, side by side, you don't leave one out, what happens is you show as an inclusive leader that I am concerned about both. I am concerned about both sides of the coin. And this structure allows individuals to agree or disagree with the decision, and they have the ability to be safe and bring up their points and their suggestions. All right, next slide. Okay, this brings us to the end on here. That was kind of the down and kind of the mucky version of going through all of inclusive leadership in just a matter of about 45 minutes. But I want you to understand something. Our ocean may not be literal, but make no mistake, we are charting unknown waters in an ever-changing social climate. But as long as we remember that inclusive leaders and inclusive leadership is about bringing the honest best out of people, we can turn obstacles into connections, and the ocean of differences that we're in right now turns into a bridge, turns into the connection between the islands and with each other. We can navigate to our future. So I just want to thank everybody for coming to this today. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk a little about inclusive leadership. My contact information is on the next slide, as well as some of my resources. Please feel free to reach out anytime. Like I said, I'm housed over in GovOps and DHRM on John Barron's team, and I'm excited to be there, and I'm excited to meet all of you. So thank you for this time, and I'll kick it back over to Rick to play me off, I guess.
Thanks, Wes. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. Get one last look at his contact information if you have questions or if you'd like to continue discussion on this topic, wporter@utah.gov. I wanted to let you know about next month's off-the-shelf offering. It'll be, oh, there's his bibliography there. Next month, we will be talking about humility, the foundation of your leadership effectiveness. It'll be a discussion led by Dan Chase. The idea here is we're going to talk about why humility is important, the surprising relationship between humility and confidence, how there's some paradoxical relationship between humility and power, and how everyday leaders can develop authentic humility. That'll be on the 18th of May at 10 a.m. We'll send out, watch for in your inboxes this afternoon for a feedback survey about today's offering, and then a way to sign up for this one. Again, thanks so much for your time, your attention. We appreciate that you're here looking to better yourself and become a stronger leader, and have a good afternoon.